Hello, and thanks for joining us for this month's edition of The Scope of Things, a no-nonsense look at the realities and enigmas of clinical research, based on those closest to the action who aim for great and, if need be, are willing to shake things up. I'm Deborah Borfitz, Senior Science Writer for Clinical Research News. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Ken Getz, Executive Director of the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, as well as the founder and chair of CSDD, the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation. Welcome, Ken. Good to be talking with you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's my pleasure to be here, and I can't think of a better person to shake things up with. So looking forward to our conversation today.
Oh, me as well. You know, our professional paths have crossed many times over the past, what has it been, 20 years now? I know we have often joked that years can go by and we'll reconnect and can pretty much pick up where we left off because things change at such a glacial pace in this industry. But I think the pandemic has, at least in some respects, scooted things along, certainly in terms of the more decentralized nature of studies. But today, I want to focus specifically on the patient engagement movement and how it is evolving in some good as well as in some more challenging ways. Are you ready?
Absolutely. And I think this is just such an important and timely moment for us to really be taking a step back and looking at the patient engagement movement. So hats off to you. This is great.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Well, first of all, there has certainly been a lot of feel-good, patient-centric, and patient-focused buzzwords floating around. So I'd like to start by sort of defining what we mean exactly by patient engagement. Like, is it simply getting individuals to feel invested in the clinical trials process beyond their actual recruitment into a study?
You know, there's a lot of confusion, if you will, around even the definition. It's become a bit of a catch-all concept that means different things to different people. Here's sort of my take on it, Deborah, and where I said I really view patient engagement as the movement itself. It's the movement to build and nurture a productive and meaningful partnership between the clinical research enterprise and the public and patient communities. And its overarching objective is really to amplify the voice of the public and patient communities to really understand and address collective as well as individual needs as they define or articulate them. And ultimately, it's really to engage patients as partners in the development and delivery of new medical therapies. And as you well know, the partnership is really the core word here. And it requires trust. It requires investment and ownership in the development activity. It requires very open, respectful, and meaningful exchange. So that's really how the patient engagement movement fits into it. You used the word patient-centric before, and I just want to sort of describe how that fits under the patient engagement umbrella.
Okay.
Patient-centric, in my mind, really refers to the means by which the clinical research community supports and achieves patient engagement. So patient-centric drug development, these are all kinds of initiatives and tactics that touch on all aspects of the development continuum, including planning and design, clinical trial execution, all the way through to trial completion. And the primary goal of patient-centric practice and patient-focused drug development is to solicit input from our patient partners and to let their insights guide us through our development planning and activity. And really, where another goal is to improve convenience and to ensure transparency and disclosure, and ultimately to leverage the data that the patient has really gifted to us, the privilege that the patient has granted us in giving us access to their data.
Yeah, very broad, very ongoing, very respectful, really, if you think about the time that patients give to a study. Without necessarily any benefit directly to them. It might just be a benefit to science at large, as you have often pointed out. And certainly this is a movement that's evolving. And so I'm wondering if you had to name one area where you've seen the most progress over the last 3 years, what would it be?
Wow. Very, very hard because I guess I'm also very critical of the slow pace with which we've embraced what both you and I agree is such an obvious and apparent need or movement. I would say that we've made the most progress in establishing patient engagement as a top of mind guiding principle.
Okay.
So it's helped in an aspirational way. It's helped us really think differently about how we do things in drug development. And perhaps, and my guess is your past guest also pointed to the use of various remote and virtual technologies as a very concrete or tangible way that we've improved convenience in patient participation. Maybe one other area I'll just note is I see many, many more companies that are interacting with patient advocacy groups to solicit input, especially in rare diseases and oncology.
Well, that's great. Yeah. So, and this might be easier for you to answer. What would you say is the biggest way this patient engagement movement has made no progress whatsoever, or maybe even done a little backsliding?
Oh my goodness. I can't pick one way, but what I can say is that this sort of aspirational place that we're in, having patient engagement as a top of mind principle, has not translated into sustainable standard practice in any way. We see a lot of piloting and a very, very low incidence of longer term or standardized activity. And, you know, I think about this a lot. Following that initial exuberance 10 years ago that was really associated with the novelty of the patient engagement movement, as we've really fallen into a rut, as you've implied, where organizations sort of weigh supporting patient-centric practices among all the other factors that they're weighing in a complex development program. So if it's going to add too much additional time, or if it's going to cost more than the original budget, then we see a lot of trade-offs and compromise, corners that might be cut. We see a lot of box checking and what I would call, and others call, tokenism, right? Where we have a single patient who might speak with a clinical team or give a keynote at a meeting or a conference, and we can check the box and say we now have patient input into our programs, right? And another area I look at is the return of trial results summaries in plain language, where we see so little compliance and support today.
Unbelievable, huh? How things just won't change. Despite that, though, the FDA is now actively weighing in and encouraging patient engagement efforts. They even issued guidance to this effect, at least for medical device trials, just in January. I know the agency also has programs to gather patient perspectives. There's this patient engagement advisory committee for devices and this patient representative program for biologics, drugs, and I believe devices as well. And the members meet annually to give their collective input on the regulatory process and the medical product reviews. And the FDA also has these sort of informal patient listening sessions to gain patient perspectives on more discrete topics and disease areas. And there was 18 last year, and most patient-led. So what flipped the switch here? And how much additional guidance is the FDA expected to offer on this front moving forward? And how will can this, change things for the industry at large?
Right. And I mean, it's great that you point to this. I will say, just to start, in sharing my view, that it's amazing what public pressure can have on regulatory agencies and some of our government agencies. So I think that encouragement and guidance from the FDA and the EMA and these listening sessions that you described, these are important steps. And we can even add to your list encouragement and guidance around the use of real-world evidence and the use of centralized clinical trial technologies, especially to accommodate the pivots and changes that occurred during the pandemic. Even the return of plain language summaries and the disclosure of demographic data about study volunteers. All of that, I think demonstrates the agency's commitment to supporting the patient engagement movement. And all of this, I think, has benefited sponsor companies. But really, to be candid, it's just not enough. It falls short. We need even stronger requirements and perhaps even enforcement. We need a continuous feedback loop to review how well these guidances and these listening sessions are really working, and how and where these initiatives are falling short. And I'll just give you a few examples.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
The drug trial snapshots program, where the FDA has been providing demographic data, most notably on the distribution of race and ethnicity of patients who've participated in new drug and biologic approvals. That's a good first step, but that data is not meaningful in the absence of disease prevalence data. And we showed this at the Tufts Center. It looked like when you saw the sort of superficial distribution that we were attracting a good mix of patients by race and ethnicity. But when you factored in disease prevalence, you saw that 80% of all clinical trials have a very high level of underrepresentation of Black patients and those of African descent. One example. Here's another. The EMA mandated the return of plain language trial results summaries. And that was in just this year. It took 8 years for the directive to even be introduced. The ct.gov registry, which we point to, the government points to as a sort of the premier place where patients can go to find information about active clinical trials and completed trials in around the world. And for anyone who's used ct.gov, you know it's incredibly technical. It's difficult to use, even for healthcare providers. And what we have found when we actually look at the data that's posted, it has minimal relevance or utility. It's incomplete and doesn't really even help the patients who would benefit by this information. So there are just so many places where we're falling short.
Wow. Are there any bright spots? I mean, I know we've been hearing a lot from you for years now about barriers to patient engagement in trials, and including how far some participants must travel to get to the study site, and the time requirement for study visits themselves in terms of frequency and duration. How are study sponsors proactively ever responding to these burdens beyond, maybe some concierge services like providing transportation to and from a study site? Any examples here to point to?
Yeah, I can. And, there are lots of ways where people are well-intentioned. And as I said, they're sort of guided by the aspiration to improve that partnership and to really make patient engagement a meaningful experience for patients, or to make the clinical trial a meaningful and engaged experience for them. And I think the area in terms of convenience is probably the one that is the most notable now. And we see so much experimentation, including conducting trials at more convenient locations, as you noted, or providing home delivery of investigational drug and diagnostic devices, the use of telehealth, which has become so pervasive in clinical trials executed throughout the pandemic or during the pandemic, the use of wearable and mobile devices, and even growing efforts to try to aggregate patient health data and incorporate that into the clinical study data set. I think what's interesting is there are so many permutations of convenience enhancing options that could be offered to study volunteers. And most of what we see now is that piloting and experimentation.
Back to that. Yep.
Yeah. But the problem is, and one of the big barriers is that convenience is subjective, and it varies. It depends on each patient's unique situation. So we really have to think about the challenge that's posed to the clinical teams when they have to weigh different options and even incorporate and manage simultaneous options in a single clinical trial.
Yeah. And that's convenience. Let's now talk about connection, because I believe I've heard you say that trial participants in general crave a sense of connection to the people responsible for a study, including the site staff and the company sponsoring the trial. And this has me wondering if this is what gave rise to the whole idea of these patient advisory boards, and perhaps also the interest in decentralizing trials more to the community-based locations, as we just mentioned.
Yeah, I really like the direction of the question. And just to take a step back, I think that connection and control are two of the most important needs that patients have when they're dealing with an illness for which a clinical trial may be necessary. And convenience will play a part, but I see that as a lesser driver, a lesser need than that a connection and a convenience. So, and in fact, we've seen time and time again in all of our research on the patient experience that the importance of the relationship between the patient and the investigative site staff, their relationship with their healthcare provider during and throughout their clinical trial participation is integral to their feeling engaged and a partner in the process. Now, the patient advisory boards is a really interesting area, and I would say that the factors that most contributed to it would include those listening sessions that you described, what many refer to as the patient-focused drug development initiative, which, as you noted, it's primarily targeting very select diseases, in most cases, really select rare diseases. So the PAB, the advisory boards, really emerged as a way to understand the health journey and the burden associated with other rare diseases and even non-rare diseases. And I think sponsors also recognize that given the hyper complexity and customization of our clinical trial designs today and their direct impact on the feasibility of the execution of the trial and the burden of participation, that soliciting input during the protocol design stages could inform and even improve that feasibility and ultimately reduce the burden of participation. So PABs have become such an important input into understanding where challenges may be encountered when the protocol is ultimately executed.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I've been thinking as you were talking about running online into your map of the patient engagement movement, suggesting that patient engaged science didn't begin until after 2020. Did I read that right? And that means during COVID. Can you explain what that means, or did I misunderstand there?
Yeah, first of all, I really need to label that map better.
Okay.
It's sort of gone viral, and I probably get an email from someone trying to understand that map at least twice a month.
Oh, geez. Okay. I'm not alone. All right.
I guess here's the way to think about it. What I'm trying to suggest in the map is that there have been sort of particular development paradigms that have guided the development community. And the patient engagement paradigm in this original map, I was suggesting would become the predominant paradigm in 2020. Not that it would begin, but that it would sort of start to take over at that time. Okay. But guess what? I was way too optimistic, Deborah. Actually, it's funny. I've actually updated that timeline several times, and I'm still way off.
That's too funny. You're too optimistic.
Way too optimistic.
Well, it was on that same map, I believe, and maybe there's a correction needed here as well, but it was talked about more forward thinking than reactive or responsive. Obviously, that's an aspiration, but is that a reality in some way?
Yeah, and this is sort of an interesting concept that I was trying to draw out in the map, and that I hear many other people talking about, and it's really looking more at the ways that we leverage data, which is central to the patient engagement movement, sort of the digital transformation of our industry. We collect so much information, rising volume and diversity of information, but so much of it is still retrospective in nature. It's descriptive and maybe diagnostic. But under the patient engagement movement, the role that data plays is sort of transformational. And a lot of that is driven by risk-based approaches and the use of predictive analytics and artificial intelligence and other tools that we use to gather evidence faster, that give us access to data faster. So ultimately, we'll be able to anticipate and predict both scientific outcomes as well as to more proactively manage some of the operational aspects of development activity.
That'll be exciting if it takes hold.
It
I hope
sure
so.
will be, but yeah. I got to keep moving that data on my
weekly updates. I want to talk a little bit about technologies that might be deployed in a clinical trial. And obviously there's things like, signing informed consent documents, on your smartphone, or the use of electronic patient reported outcomes software to automatically log data from home. The convenience of having research staff available via text or a video chat to answer questions, perhaps 24/7 even. Are these, though, the tactics that are in fact making patients feel engaged, or are they more appreciated niceties or add-ons? Is it worth the investment?
There's growing body of research that shows that that at times the investment really yields a meaningful return. But I think the answer to your question is that at the end of the day, it depends on the patient. That none of these tactics should be viewed as sort of all or nothing, but instead these are options that we're offering patients. And we also know that patient preferences are so widely variable, right? And determined by so many factors, including their age and race and ethnicity and gender and the burden of disease and how they manage it individually and many other social determinants. So the opportunity here and the challenge is how we can be good, how we can do a better job at using some of these tactics. In some cases, it will only be nice to have. In others, it will be essential. And how do we accommodate and manage all of these, the relevant preferences so that it really reinforces a meaningful experience and a convenient experience for patients? It collects the data that we ultimately need to really address the most relevant clinical endpoints, and that where we maintain the integrity and of the research itself. So it's an exciting time, but it's also a huge challenge because it suggests that our trials are going to get more and more customized and more complex, and that typically increases timelines, challenges quality, makes recruitment and retention even harder.
Yeah, all the things we don't want and that won't encourage experimentation to get to that end. So, yeah, complicated indeed. Uh, the use of health, and this is something you mentioned a moment ago about healthcare providers, and I know you described them as sort of enablers of patient engagement, which makes a lot of sense. Doctors are, who patients see the most on a regular basis. That's who they trust. But currently, is there much connection or any connecting points between clinical practice and clinical research? Is this still an evolving area? Where is it happening well, if anywhere?
Yeah, this is an area that I view as such a huge untapped opportunity at this time. And I just want to echo what you said, that the healthcare provider, that clinical care community, is the source, the most trusted and preferred source for information, and the preferred place or where trials would be conducted if they had to be done in a physical facility, right? We see also, when you look at and conduct studies among healthcare providers, you see time and time again a very, very high willingness to refer patients into clinical trials, but the referral rates are remarkably low. And it's really the bottleneck is that there are many factors that are predictive of higher referral rates. And it includes familiarity and prior exposure to clinical research, which is fairly limited. The proximity to where the research is actually conducted relative to where the healthcare professional sits, and the ease with which credible information about clinical research can be processed by the healthcare provider. And some of these areas can be addressed by decentralized clinical trial solutions. There are many companies even that are trying to embed clinical research professionals into clinical care settings. But it's been very hard for them to gain a foothold in clinical care, in part because these are very, very entrenched environments, the dynamics, the economics, so many factors that really make it so difficult to gain that foothold. And again, as I said, we just have not figured out how to connect these two distinct and separate worlds where we share infrastructure, we share data. This will ultimately be such an important way that we can support clinical research and really drive faster cycle times and improvements in the economics of drug development. And just one last thing I'll note is that patients think in clinical research are sort of exist harmoniously in a single world. They don't understand that these are totally separate and siloed environments.
That's interesting. Yeah, because we're so familiar that we just assume everyone else is as well. And I know in just talking to my friends, I realize they have no idea what I'm talking about when I even just say clinical research or clinical trial. And it's been our world for so long, it's hard to imagine not having that context. And that's what we all have to remember. I want to make sure that we touch on other patient engagement sort of tactics, if you will. I don't know if we talked a whole bunch yet about, participants weighing in on study protocols, like are we making good progress there? Community outreach, just being culturally sensitive. Anything there that you'd really like to, hone in on here?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many initiatives. And in addition to the ones you've mentioned, I really always encourage colleagues to keep their eye on public education. That, as so many have noted, we're all patients at one time in our lives. And in fact, all of us think about and deal with health-related matters on a daily basis. So just looking at the importance of engaging and educating the public, especially in underserved communities, as we touched on, that outreach and the ability to enable healthcare providers to be facilitators of engagement. The area of site selection and management. We've been doing studies, Deborah, that really demonstrate the relationship between investigative site personnel diversity and the diversity of the patients who've been enrolled.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunity there. In addition to the advisory boards, we are also seeing work done in terms of the development of a participation burden assessment tool that could be done right at the beginning of protocol design to using sort of an algorithm to help companies quickly see where they may encounter the highest level of burden so that they can address that early in the design of the study. And there's the whole area of plain language, not only trial results, but informed consent and protocol summaries, as well as even just the translation of scientific information in peer-reviewed journals that would benefit patients and their healthcare providers. So lots of places that we look at all the time.
Okay, very good. Lots of options, but none of them are going to be looked at unless study sponsors believe that it's going to move the needle on patient engagement. So what evidence do we have that it does? I mean, at least in terms of the metrics that matter to sponsors, that being saving time, saving money, the ability of sites to recruit more than one patient, which you've talked about forever, the pace of enrollment, retention rates, study protocol compliance, et cetera, et cetera. What does the evidence say?
So there is a ton of evidence. Some of it that we've gathered at the Tufts Center, and it does show and demonstrate impact along the lines that you described in a number of places. That select patient engagement initiatives will accelerate certain clinical trial cycle time durations. It can improve recruitment and retention rates. It will improve the incidence and frequency of protocol amendments, for example. But the big problem is that most of the evidence is trial specific. And as a result, and knowing just how customized we are in mixing and matching and using different initiatives, we often see people who discount the evidence because it doesn't directly apply to the way that they want to deploy technology or the types of initiatives that they're supporting. They know that it's perhaps on a piloted basis for a disease condition that won't translate easily to the disease condition for which they're studying. So that's part of the problem, is that this growing body of evidence is often discounted. It's not sufficient enough to sort of really move the needle in a meaningful way. Yeah.
All you can keep doing is throwing it out there, Ken, because you are always going to be my go-to guy for any sort of study-related metric. If you have just a piece of the puzzle, you're putting it out there, and we just have to run with it sometimes. And there's a starting place, and you can't get there without taking baby steps.
I really appreciate that, and I would say I'm really trying. I view myself really as an educator here, and using data and evidence to really inform. And as you note, I will always keep trying. We are trying to do more where we get companies to share data so we can sort of aggregate it up to a level where we can show some, meaningful benchmarks, but it's really hard to do.
Yeah, it is. It is. But we'll get there eventually, or we'll just keep moving, your map to a future time point until we get there. Oh, Ken. Well, this is all the time we have for today, but it has been a pleasure, as always, chatting with you. And we'll pick up the conversation again soon if you're game.
Absolutely. And I just want to say thank you for all that you do to also educate and inform, and always a pleasure speaking with you.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And a big thank you to everyone out there for listening in. For more straight talk on studies involving humans, visit clinicalresearchnewsonline.com. And if you're a clinical research professional, we hope also to see you at our next SCOPE conference, where we make things happen. Bye for now.